Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all. It is a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much to AgriChain and Deepak and Niraj for the invitation. And I was blown away by the work that is being done by Ag Unity and also HARA. Very much glad to see that we are all addressing what is a very important aspect. Um, as we all know, we may not, I hear some of us have gone to the farm, but I think that if we eat food, we are part of agriculture. And if we want to make sure that we continue to have nutritious, non-lab created food, we need to make sure that we are doing as much as possible. And this is a big world. As David Davis pointed out, 3.1 billion people without access. Many of us going in the field and doing something will help change. So happy to tell you a bit about the story of what we've been doing lately in AgriLedger, and also how we are using blockchain technology to really address the value chain in agriculture. So, sorry. Sorry. We have done our work actually in Haiti. And if those of you who are not aware of Haiti, it's a beautiful island in the Caribbean, which was first discovered in 1492 by Christopher Columbus, when he had actually gotten the Queen of Spain to fund him and his team to go find India. He was trying to find a new route to India and instead landed in the Caribbean. And the first island that he uncovered was Haiti. It was populated by the inhabitants, which became known as the Red Indian, the Karanabo. And as we know, history became that this was where they uncovered the ability to do sugar, then were able to find the rest of the world, as they say, which is Mexico, and going up to finding Latin America and North America. So very seminal. Haiti has a lot of history. In 1804, Haiti was the first country to actually gain its independence, first Black nation to gain its independence by force. As a result, there is a lot of beautiful castles and also forts which were put in. And if we look at this fort, this is Sans Souci, and it's about 1,500 feet above sea level, so that they would not allow the French or any other nation such as Spanish and the English who really wanted to get back in, because at the time of its independence, Haiti was producing about 40% of the GDP of France, and that was more sugar and cocoa than the whole of England, where England already had in 1804 the Indian continent. So as you can imagine, it was a very big loss for France, and not one that they took lightly. They actually had Haiti pay 40 million, and that was finally paid at the beginning of the 20th century. So you can imagine that was a hardship on the country. But the biggest hardship was that really that their access to market was now cut off. Previously, things would get on a small boat, would be sent up to the US, and then would then go to Europe. With now this country being populated by former slaves and also managed, and the leadership was all from African descent, the US still had at that point slavery, so they didn't want to really deal with them, so which meant the country now became landlocked and with no ability to get anywhere. So what that actually created is where Haiti has never really recovered from this. In the early 1900s, you had the independence, lack of access to market. Then in the beginning of the 20th century, you had the US government coming over. And that created a lot of puppet states. And the last bit was more around the Petrocaribe. Petrocaribe was a program by Venezuela where they were giving about 30% in discount for the gas to the countries in the Americas in a way of thwarting the US government. But what happens is that the Haitian leadership at the time did not use it to actually um, improve infrastructure, but instead line their own pocket. So while the world now understands what it is to be in lockdown, Haiti has had lockdown since the 2018, um, beginning of 2018, and people are not able to work, get anything done. Uh, they are shooting, and as of last week, there was even more disturbance. So, which means that most people live in fear and also without hope. Now, that means that the economic reality of the country is that the only bits that come in are through remittance. And as per the FAO, Haiti imports almost 90% of the food that it actually consumes. But there is so much which is actually being created in Haiti, which is actually not getting to market. And this is where the the whole idea of decentralized exchange of value came in. So the World Bank, about 9 years ago, started a project, which is a development aid project, where they started looking, how could you invigorate and empower the bottom 40% of poverty? And when we look at poverty across the world, unfortunately, that bottom 40% tends to be subsistence farmers or smallholder farmers with less than 1 acre of land in the developing economies. And in what we would say developed economies, I was very surprised to find out that even in the US, 80% of the smallholder farmers is actually in the US with less than 3 acres. So now when you start looking at exchange of value, how do you bridge in that everyone can participate and that they also are able to get the right value and equitable? So not just fair, but an equitable exchange. So when we look at distributed ledger technology, as David rightly said, it is not blockchain just because of blockchain. You really need to look at what is the business that you're trying to um, affect, who are playing in the field. So obviously, if it is two parties, you may not want to have that be the case. But if you are looking at several organizations, so the producers, the transportation, the transformation, the brokers, the buyers, and also finance, and we would even add into this the purveyors of seeds and all of those things, and you can even add insurance. You now start having many individuals working in the space that, and this is why in agriculture, so agriculture, I would say, is the oldest supply chain, but it's also the most opaque, and also a time where most individuals are working against each other rather than for each other because they don't trust one another. So bringing that into shape, we really look at what are the challenges in agriculture, everything from food waste to food safety, lack of trust, lack of information, and more than important is the lack of financial inclusion and liquidity. So how do you inject liquidity closer in to the agriculture becomes the key. So when we look at the value chain, it can be pretty simple when you're looking at from the local market. So farmer to local market, you can be able to have orders in, and this is actually needed in many of these, I would say in the Caribbean and also in Africa, because when you start looking, the internal don't even trust the information. So being able to create a local market where we know where the chain of custody has been and where the goods come from, and being able to almost, this is really the marketplace for the farmers, being able to have those things and then be assuring the market versus the value chain where it goes international, which is much more lucrative. You have a number of participant, as I explained before, everything from transport, packing, custom, shipment, and finally the consumer. And being able to give to that consumer the view that everything has happened, that all the phytosanitary, so the regulations of the importing country, and also the export country have been taken into place, and also the whole journey. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what we did in Haiti. So as a question for everyone, let's say we sold, we see a mango selling at $3 at the supermarket. How much would you think that actually is going to the farmer, which is producing this mango? Give you a couple minutes. Can't see with Zoom what the answers are, but to give you a view, about 2% of the earning is actually going to the farmer, with 98% of it lost to middlemen. And that is due to inefficiency, and also in terms of the farmer himself not being able to get market access. So now if you could just imagine a world where it takes seconds to know how much was paid to a producer, and you could do it at the click of looking at the item that you've bought. This is what we're doing with the World Bank, and it's happening right now. With the changes that we made with the Haiti project, the farmers' earning went to 68%, and the service providers went to 32%. And I will tell you the truth, I was expecting the farmers' earning to be at 32%. But what we did, which was very revolutionary, is using the asset aspect of blockchain to retain ownership, to give that farmer the ability to remain as the owner all the way to the foreign market. So in the Haiti, we did in 2020, at the height of COVID, so from May 1st till the end of July, there were 6 mango run, basically. We couldn't go as wide as we had wanted to. We had about 500 farmers registered at the time. Those are registered with the government, and this is really, they have a choice to participate, so they call when they're ready. So there were 6 runs, 38,000 kg of mango were actually harvested, and of that, 23,000 went to market. Some of that waste could be attributed to the farmer not coming in with the right temperature or the maturity. And those are things that then denotes that the field agent will work with them to explain what needs to happen. But as a total, that 23,000 kg netted about $40,000. The local price for the mango at the time was 14 cents a kg. The international price, without then being told that it was actually coming in from a blockchain traceability or all that wonderful stuff, was $2.50 a kg, which meant that after everything was paid, so now you start looking at cost of goods sold, everyone's paid, the broker, the transportation, and everything else, the farmers ended up at 1.86 a kg, so a 750% increase in income. So in terms of how we communicate with them, there is a harvesting that happens. We do send text messages to the farmer when he tells us that he's ready. We tell him when he's going to pick up. He also will sign up when the contract is, and this is one thing very important, the contract is from the farmer to everybody else. So he brings in the goods, it's actually reviewed, and at that point, he is told how many has been received, and from there, he signs a contract and gives the right to the transportation, the transformation, the data passing, being able to transfer the data for him to the bank, and also for the bank to do. So we actually only give instructions. we tell the bank what to pay after the smart contract has looked and seen who's participating. So not only do we trace the I would say where the stuff has been, so the value chain, but also we trace what are the obligation that it has. So we're able to also see when the payment have been received by the farmers and the various entities, because the bank will is one of the nodes on the system. In terms of with the customer, what we do is we try to create a relationship with the food, because I think it's important for people to be able to understand where their food comes from. So, and also we provide them with things like nutritional value. And finally, I don't know about you, sometimes I get lost, I forget that I have something in the fridge and it goes bad. So it's great to know what recipes I can do with it and do something different. In terms of the benefits that we see, some of those go into the farmers in terms of giving them cost efficiency, automation, precision, and improved margin, but also in terms of the sustainability and a trusted and secure and empowerment. And this is really about bridging the ecosystem to allow them to do this. The Haiti project was the use case whereby we're using it directly from the farmers. And as you can imagine, one of the challenges sometimes is getting the crowd to actually participate and to demonstrate that. And so now we can work with brands to actually, because if we look, brands and suppliers have hundreds of farmers that they need, not hundreds of suppliers, which means thousands of farmers that they need to get information about. And if you look at the data, they usually stop at the supplier and they don't really know what's happening at the farm level. So if we start looking at ESG, how can they actually provide evidence that they are having sustainable empowerment and adequate payment to the farmers, and that also the goods have not been tampered with or actually have had all the phyto and environmental needs that need to be kept. So in terms of the technology, we are using a permission database using Corda. And this allows us to be able to look at the supply chain, know the customer, the payment, and also the blockchain components. And we have, we have done it to where the root authority is considered. So the root authority is the government of Haiti, but there are many ways of being able to configure that this was what the customer wanted. So now we are looking at where we add other nodes such as the insurance, the seed suppliers, and also the farmer. So we have built an end-to-end traceable platform, which allows you to incorporate geotags, sensors, and IoT, and gives a visualization not only to the farmers, should they have the right tools, but also to all the necessary, so with having also a certain level of anonymity, being able to give government and also the brands the information that they need, such as what has been picked up, what has been rejected, and also the overall value of the goods. Finally, what we do is really work with the smart contract to allow, as I spoke about, the traceability and of the obligation. So working with this idea of factoring, so you can actually have a prepayment done to the producer when they deliver. We are also exploring, as was explained by Hara, how we would incentivize them along the line if there is a company which is providing financing ahead, and that company could be the brand which is actually now providing that payment early on, and then looking at using factoring units where they say, because the information is in the blockchain and the buyer has agreed that they have an obligation to pay this, the smart contract can then send the instructions to the bank to make the payments accordingly. So it will pay everyone at the same time, which also means streamlining of payment instructions. So that's all. Thank you very much for the time, and happy to take any questions if there is time permission.
Yeah, thanks a lot for a very enlightening presentation. And I hope many of us start looking at those economies where the impact of technologies like blockchain would be manifold. So the first question, Genevieve, for you would be when we talk about ESGs and when we talk about SDGs, right, the traceability of that becomes a pretty decent challenge. And as you rightly identified that by just reading suppliers or buyers, I'll say that data is not going to give you the big picture. We would like to understand that how do you see the scalability of these solutions, especially when we talk about Africa, because believe me, Africa is one continent, I'm in love with it. So there is a saying, a great leader, that I'm African not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in Africa. Right. So based on that, I would like to understand how do you see such solution, because you have exposure of Africa, that rolling out this solution in some of the parts of Africa.
Sure. I apologize. It seems somebody else is on the line also. Gaetan, do you mind muting yourself, please? Thank you. Yes. So what it is that one of the challenges of the technology, the blockchain technology at this point, is really the scalability. So we chose to use Corda, and at this time, I can tell you, unlike the whole blockchain network, they're basically using PCs to do the proof of work, you're not going to be able to do that. And so what we've envisioned is instead subnodes with global nodes where you're now reporting the data up. So so you could see in a country more than one. Idea would be to have one application for everything, but none of the blockchain technology right now can do that. I'd say if one was to do this, you would need to be using a run-of-the-mill database, which also could be acceptable, and you would have a level 2, level 1 where you're using oracles. What we're trying to actually advocate for is what I would call to be the metadata. So if you start looking at a commodity, anything that is being produced as a commodity, and you look at what are the attributes that you need to always keep track of, what are the environmental that you need to keep track of, and how do you denote value, because usually it's going to be based on grading and location, then you can provide a seal of approval until we have blockchain databases which allows for all this influx of data. One of the challenges that Corda allowed me to do was to actually, because you're not passing data from node to node, you can actually keep a lot of data in each node without passing it to the whole system and getting bloated. So one of the ideas that I think we're all getting to is that it's not just about the blockchain. The blockchain provides certainty. What is necessary then is how do you take that data and you create better insight into the process. And that is where I think we're all maturing. So some of us are using it to create financial marketplaces. Others are creating marketplaces for selling. And then for me, what we're looking at is more, how do I create and retain the value and get that information up? So it will be as the big thing about blockchain is about collaboration. So I see a lot of interchange chain collaboration coming down the pipe in the next 2 to 3 years, because you we won't have as startup the financing to be able to do everything, and it may not be very good to do all that. So for Africa, I see regional, because you'll remember also, even in Africa, you have a French-speaking region and you have the English-speaking region. So keeping that, but I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is around their infrastructure. So we want to work with farmers, but the infrastructure to get goods to market is at best non-existent. You have a country like Kenya, Ethiopia, and also South Africa, which are well done. But if you look at a country like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you can't get anywhere past the borders of the big cities. So Kinshasa to Goma, the only way there is by plane. So if you are going to be getting goods over, you've got to get them to the coast, east, west, to be able to send out. So that's a lot of cost. So we need for infrastructures to be handled first. And then finally, one of the things I'd like to bring is that for us, we're not asking for the farmer to actually have a smartphone. We're just asking for them to have communication. I think that eventually they will get there with the smartphone and they will be able to buy it on their own. And it is going to democratize their life in so many ways, because they'll have access to so much more information. But what we will need to be looking at is, for the next couple of years, until these blockchain companies actually come up with databases which are much more resilient, how to parse that data and to create those Oracle connectivities.
Yeah, very well articulated. In fact, like, having good exposure to Africa, even like, the utilities and electricity, that's a big challenge. And when you want to put up a blockchain infrastructure, that is bare minimum. And I believe that modern developments and like business model as well as technical model of using proof of stake and all that would like reduce substantially the usage of utility would be of a great value. Thanks a lot for extremely insightful session. It was an honor to have you. Look forward to have more interactions with you and keep the pot boiling so that all of us are able to contribute in making this world fairer, better, and more rewarding for our farmers. That 2%, believe me, I hated it, and I keep on seeing that every day. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Back